Alright guys, BLM here, we're back with a new video. In this video I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite graphic adventure games, and that is Life is Strange 1. I really love Life is Strange 1. While it's not flawless, I do really love the time travel elements, and I really get connected to the character of Max Caulfield. As of right now, I've played Life is Strange over 10 times, and I really enjoy every episode of the game, but in this video we'll be ranking each of those episodes. Now this list will only include Life is Strange 1, so it will not include Before the Storm or Life is Strange 2. The reason for that is because I personally have not played Life is Strange 2 yet, that and also it's not finished at the time of recording, and Before the Storm is just something I didn't care for. Even if I did add Before the Storm to the list, all of those episodes would pretty much be at the bottom, as I think every single Life is Strange 1 episode is better than every single episode Before the Storm. Though if I were to rank the Before the Storm episodes, from top to bottom, they would be episode 2, then 1, then Farewell, and then 3. Something else I should mention is that this video will be filled with spoilers for the entire season 1 of Life is Strange, so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this video. Now with that out of the way, let's get started. So let's start off with my number 5 episode. The worst episode of Life is Strange season 1 to me is episode 5, Polarized, the final episode. And while I do think this is the worst episode of the season, I do still really like it. Many of my problems with this episode is the fact that it's so linear. There's only one area in this entire episode that is built for exploration, that's the art exhibit, and even that area isn't even that exciting. Another negative for me are some of the sections in the nightmare sequence that are pretty annoying to play, such as the weird stealth section. A problem I have with the narrative of the episode is that there's so much time traveling involved, which normally I would think would be pretty cool, but I feel like this episode does it way too much, which makes it pretty confusing to figure out what's going on and what timeline you're in. And my final criticism for this episode is the ending. Not necessarily the actual events of the ending themselves, but the fact that it's a binary choice between two endings that make all of your previous choices feel pointless, as they don't have any effect on the actual final outcome, especially when this game was doing such a good job of that up until this point, with a lot of your choices having consequences in future episodes. But now for the positives. I do think the narrative throughout this episode is still pretty strong, with some pretty great moments between the conversations with Max and Jefferson, the development of David's character, and the fulfillment of Max's character arc. I do think that the Sacrifice Chloe ending really wraps up the game's narrative so perfectly, even though it does undo all of the events that happened in the game before that. Overall, while I do enjoy episode 5, I do think it is the most flawed of the bunch, which makes it the lowest ranked episode for me. Now it's time to move on to my number 4 episode of Life is Strange, and that is episode 1, Chrysalis, which again is an episode I really enjoy, but I do feel like it's the least ambitious of the bunch and has a much smaller scale than a lot of future episodes. I think this episode does a really good job at what it's trying to do, which is set up the game's world and characters. This episode's heavily focused on exploration, with almost every area in the episode allowing us to talk and interact with numerous things within it, turning this episode, which could be finished in under an hour when rushing, to a nearly 3-hour episode when you explore every area. Through this exploration, you meet so many characters that you never interact with within the main story, even though they're hanging about every episode. And through this, you learn about so many side stories that turn these one-dimensional characters into interesting characters that have interesting backgrounds. That being said, the main story of this episode just isn't as strong as later ones, especially after Max saves Chloe at the beginning of the episode. The rest of the episode is pretty much comprised of random tasks that lead to you giving back Warren's flash drive, followed by you running into Chloe, leading to her confrontation with David, and then Max telling Chloe about her powers. There are a lot of tonal inconsistencies within these scenes, however I guess you could say that for every episode, but I feel like episode 1 does it more blatantly. Overall, episode 1 is still a good start to the series, and one that perfectly introduces the game's concept, world, and characters. But because of its smaller scale, I don't think I could put it any higher than this. Now it's time to move on to the episode that I consider to be in the middle of the pack. The number 3 episode of Life is Strange is episode 3, Chaos Theory. So I'll start off with the big positive of this episode, which is that this entire episode focuses on the relationship between Max and Chloe, with them spending time together the entire episode, and with the first half of the episode being the most blatant display of their relationship, through them dealing with the aftermath of the previous episode's ending and also doing research on Rachel Amber's disappearance, with some great character moments in the pool and also in Chloe's bedroom the morning after. The back third of the episode is the weakest part for me, especially with this weird section where you have to get the keys from Frank, and to do that you have to get information from Nathan and the cop, which leads to Frank pulling out his keys in front of Max to intimidate her. It's just a really strange scene. And then we also have the dumb temper tantrum from Chloe at the very end of the episode after she learns about Rachel's relationship with Frank. And while the game tries to make you feel bad for Chloe, it's scenes like this that make me realize that Chloe's just a terrible human being. But a positive from this point on, though, is that after this we do learn about Max being able to time travel through photos, which leads to a fantastic cliffhanger ending, though it is a bit overdramatic. Like episode 1, though, this episode is on a bit of a smaller scale than the 2 remaining episodes, with about half of the episode being Max and Chloe sneaking around Blackwell, and the second half just being at Chloe's house and also at the Two Whales Diner, which are 2 areas that we've already been to in the past. Overall, episode 3 is still a really good episode, mostly due to the relationship between Max and Chloe, but it isn't the most consistent episode, and it is a bit smaller in scale than the 2 remaining ones, so that's why I have this episode where it is. So now we're down to the final 2 episodes, and my number 2 episode of Life is Strange is episode 2, Out of Time. And to be honest, episodes 2 and 3 are pretty close for me. I do feel like episode 2 does edge out episode 3 by being a slightly bit larger in scale, and also by having that fantastic Kate Marsh scene at the end. This episode, like episode 1, focuses on introducing characters like Joyce and Frank, and expanding the world to more than just Blackwell Academy. It also sets up the overall narrative by having the Kate Marsh stuff really kicking off the investigation that becomes such an integral part of the rest of the story. This episode does split its time between expanding on Max and Chloe's relationship and also Max and Kate's. A lot of the Max and Chloe stuff here isn't as good as what we will get in episode 3, but still not bad. And the Kate relationship here is obviously pretty important. And I really like how the ending, the fact that either she kills herself or that you rescue her, is determined on how much you paid attention to her conversations, and also how much you paid attention to the things that are in her room. The main negative for me here is that there are a couple bits that are pretty annoying from a gameplay perspective. Most of which just being Max proving to Chloe that she has time travel abilities, like the time where Max has to predict what's in Chloe's pockets, or the time that Max has to direct Chloe on where to shoot. Overall, episode 2 is pretty good, but it does still have some major flaws that keep it from being my number 1 episode in the series. Alright, so we're finally here. My favorite episode of Life is Strange is, I mean, if you couldn't tell, it's episode 4, Dark Room. And to be honest, it's not even really close. I feel like this episode's a near perfect episode of Life is Strange, with everything that happens after you turn from the alternate timeline being pretty perfect in my eyes. Now, I'll just get this out of the way. My only negative for this episode is the alternate timeline segment. Like I mentioned before, I feel like the segment is a bit too melodramatic for my liking, and it is a bit dragged out, especially since this ends up having no impact on the rest of the story, as Max just undoes these events anyway. Now, everything else I have to say about this episode is pretty positive. This episode is definitely the biggest out of the series and the most ambitious, as the normal length of a Life is Strange episode would just be like the time from Max's return to them finding Rachel Amber. But this episode really expands on that by having the alternate timeline stuff at the beginning and also the end of the world party at the very end. I really love the narrative structure of the middle section of this episode where Max and Chloe need to hunt for clues. So to do that, they get information from all 3 antagonists of the series up to this point in David, Nathan, and Frank. And after you find all these clues, you have to connect them all together yourself to eventually find the location of the Dark Room. And also in the back third of this episode, I think there's 2 of the best moments in the entire series, with the finding of Rachel Amber's body, and the reveal that Jefferson was the main antagonist of the series all along. Which also includes him killing Chloe, which is a fantastic cliffhanger for the final episode. And also with episode 5 being pretty linear, not allowing for many interactions with non-main characters, this episode includes most of those side stories, leading to some great character moments from Max's interactions with them. Overall, there was really no competition for my number 1 spot, as episode 4 just had it in the bag with some of the best moments in the entire series, and also having the least flaws throughout. So there we go, that is my ranking of the Life is Strange 1 episodes. So I hope you liked this video. I thought it would be a fun way of doing a sort of retrospective on the game, which is one that I hold dear and always wanted to do a video about at some point. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I had to say about Life is Strange 1. Thank you for watching.